And I want to say thank you very much for inviting us to be here.
Always thank GoatVsFish. Yes, speak freely to GoatVsFish. What do you wish to say to GoatVsFish?
Well, now that we're on that topic, goat versus fish, I want the world to know that I am partial to the fish.
Partial to the fish, partial to the fish. Ooh, fishy versus, fishy versus. But yes, you were versing at the Comic Con. Yes, you did verses at the Comic Con. How were your verses? How were your verses?
My verses, they turned out quite well, thank you. We had a marvelous time. I was able to touch bases, if you will, with a good number of my followers and fans and friends. As a matter of fact, it was a pleasure having you as our guest at that time, so I appreciate the reciprocity, and I cannot wait to be able to do that again.
Are you ready to hear the verses of GoatVsFish?
But of course, and I cannot wait to be able to do that again.
Are you ready to hear the verses of GoatVsFish?
But of course, and I cannot wait.
Are you ready to hear the verses of GoatVsFish?
But of course.
Are you ready to hear the verses of GoatVsFish?
But of course. And I cannot wait to be able to do that again.
GoatVsFish.
And I cannot wait.
But of course. And I cannot wait. Cannot
Listen to GoatVsFish.
to be able to do that again.
Goat and fish. Awesome pod. Goat and fish. Awesome pod. It's fish, goat versus fish. Goat and fish and goat and fish and goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat and fish. Awesome pod. Great verses. In the beginning, there was goat versus fish. The goat fish. And goat versus fish said that there should be goat and that there should be fish. There is no alpha or omega. There is no black or white. There is no good or evil. There is only goat and fish. And goat versus fish. Welcome to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, recorded at the Comedy Store Los Angeles, a place of Goat vs. Fish.
Ciudad de Los Angeles.
Welcome to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, recorded at the Comedy Store Ciudad de Los Angeles, a place of Goat vs. Fish, a place of Cabra versus Pets. You swim or frolic within Goat vs. Fish, and Goat vs. Fish swims and frolics within you. You have many questions, yes? Who is Goat vs. Fish? What is Goat vs. Fish? Why is Goat vs. Fish? But there is only one question. Are you goat or are you fish? Who shall triumph, the goat or the fish? Let us find out on this verses of Goat versus Fish. Fences. Always in the way, these fences. Getting in the way of the verses. Have you encountered a fence sitter in your verses this one, yes? Have you encountered any fence sitters as of late verses?
Now, how far back are we speaking? I mean, from babyhood?
If there is a fence that you are very reminded of, yes, then speak of that fence. You may speak of that fence sitter.
Well, I've been a fence sitter once or twice in my life, but then I also recall a few other fence sitters that had something in common with us. We all seemed to got paint on our bottom.
From sitting on the fence.
From sitting on the fence.
Oh, so fence-sitterly. That is not pleasant. Oh, that is not pleasant at all.
Oh, the paint was okay. It was the point on the edge of the fence, each one of those posts, that was the problem.
Pointy fence-sitters. Pointily, pointing. Yes, they're always saying they are pointing out to Goat versus Fish. They say, well, what of this point, Goat versus Fish? There is some other thing that is not a goat or a fish. One was calling itself a giraffe. It was calling itself a giraffe at a recent verses of Goat versus Fish.
I think I have heard.
Do you suppose a giraffe is a goat or a fish?
I think a giraffe is... It has to do with the day. I mean, on one day he's a fish, on one day he's a goat.
Yes, it is so fancifully always not choosing between goat and fish. What about this versus? What about this versus now?
I'm going to say fish.
It comes from one that is partial to fish. Oh, it comes from one that is partial to fish.
Great verses.
Listen to these verses. Are you ready for some verses? Are you ready for verses?
Of course.
Adults whim. Adults whim. Is it the adult's whim to choose goat or fish? Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. Adult Swim, well, it seems fishy, 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 fish, fish, fish. Swimming of the fish, swimming of the fish. It is right there in the verses of the Adult Swim, the swimming of the fish. Aqua Teen Hunger Force. Aqua is the sea of the fish. Aqua is the sea of the fish. Sea Lab 2020. Sea Lab 2020. 2020 fish. 2020 fish. Space Ghost. Coast to coast. The land that meets the sea, they do call it the coast. Yes, it is near the sea. Perhaps there is some goat in the Adult Swim. There are 2 goats in a trench coat. Yes, but so much evidence of fish. So much evidence of fish. The many living streams of the Adult Swim. Yes, the live streams of the fish, they do call it. And Fish Center Live. Fish Center Live. Oh, the fish of Fish Center Live. The fish of Fish Center Live. Let us recall the fish of Fish Center Live. Hot Steve.
Frying pan.
You versed it.
Ooh, what verses are these? Oh, what are these verses? Explain these verses of Hot Steve to the frying pan. Yes, what is this of which you speak?
Makes me hungry. I can't understand. It's for some reason, another for some unknown, unearthly reason. Makes me hungry.
Hot Steve is making this one hungry for fish?
Yes. See, because I have a philosophy behind that. For some strange reason, people in the world seem to speak of marine life that we eat. That's seafood. I'm here to correct that issue. It has been troubling me for such a long time that people would have the audacity to say, I like seafood.
You did just say it. You just said it.
Well, I do like seafood.
Are you goat or are you fish?
I'm a fish.
It is a fish. We celebrate this fish. We celebrate the fish. We celebrate the fish. Fish. And what do the fish call this fish? What do the fish call this fish?
Marine food, commonly known in Espanol as mariscos.
Ah, so you are called mariscos, the marine fish?
I'm Mr. Pisces. The fish. Mr. Pisces, we go either way. To the left, to the right, to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south. 1 minute we're traveling one direction. The next minute we're traveling the other direction. Hence the words, what day is it? Because I'm called different names on different days. But primarily I'm called Ron Austar.
It is called primarily Ron Austar Fish. Pleasant to verses with you, primarily Ron Austar Fish.
And then likewise.
Great verses.
At the verses of Comic-Con, GoatVsFish was a very important goat fish at the Adult Swim State Park, they called it. There was a river which GoatVsFish did move through that surrounded the Adult Swim State Park, which itself was by the very sea. GoatVsFish saw one sitting, gathered by a warm verses, and shared with them the verses of GoatVsFish, some of which you can see on the YouTube if you search GoatVsFish FT Adult Swim. But most versesly of all, GoatVsFish appeared in a short verses, but a verses nonetheless, on the living stream. Stupid morning bullshit. Episode 613 SDCC, day 1 at 16:18, where all heard the sound and saw the giant amplified visage of GoatVsFish. GoatVsFish did even receive offerings for winning on some verses you call bingo. Is bingo goat or fish? It was goat versus fish. It was goat versus fish, that versus. Of course, triumph is for the goat and fish, not the pitiable fence-sitter. But when one gives their verses to goat versus fish, well, perhaps there are some verses for goat versus fish to triumph in after all. If you wish to see Goat vs. Fish on Adult Swim, do tell Adult Swim on the Twitterverse, and be sure to @Goat vs. Fish. You can do it even now. You can do it even now. But there is one fish. There is one fish who swims ever so pleasantly in the Adult Swim, and swims ever so pleasantly with Goat vs. Fish. And that fish is here now. On this versus, Goat vs. Fish speaks to a fish.
They call the fish Pisces.
Goat vs. Fish has heard that you make an unusual sound for a fish. Yes, what is the sound of this fish? What is the sound of this fish? Now that is fish. That is fish. Yes, let us hear it again, yes? Ah, that is the sound of a fish. Yes, that is the sound of a fish. But Goat vs. Fish, whenever the goat and fish are speaking to you, fish, that is calling itself Pisces, yes? Goat vs. Fish has heard of the Pisces that say they are fish because they are a Pisces, yes? But you are simply called Pisces and you are a fish, yes?
But of course.
But of course, yes. Goat vs. Fish, whenever you are versing about fish, there are always ones that are saying, what is it that they are saying is your sound? They are saying it is a do-da-da, do-dee, do-dee-dow. What is the sound of that verses they're always making to you, fish?
Do-da-do-do.
Ah, this do-da-do-do.
Do-da-do-do?
Do-da-do-do.
That's a particular phrase, and it's what would we call that? We'd call that a sign. It's a sign that helps you to relate to a fellow that we know in this world as Pierre.
Ah, it is called Pierre. There's another one that is called Pierre, yes?
Pierre.
Is that one you, or is that some other one?
That would be me in a different life.
Is this to say that you were goat? Is this to say that you were goat when one was calling itself Pierre, yes?
I guess you could see it that way.
Tell us of these other verses when you were a goat that was called Pierre, yes? How are they different from your verses as fish?
Keeping meat ice cold.
Cold as the bottom of the sea, cold as the bottom of the sea.
Quite chill.
Now, Goat vs. Fish, yes, wants you to... think about your dad. What is your dad like? I want to meet that dad.
I want to meet that dad.
Great verses.
Is your dad goat or fish?
You know, that's a question that that's still in the air, and I'm looking forward to finding that out myself. I'm going to have to look into that. You'll have to give me a moment. And you to be thanked. I appreciate that. I can only say that in my own personal opinion, I'm going to say he's probably riding with a goat.
Do you often versus that goat? Do you often versus that goat?
Seldom.
But it is still goat versus fish.
But of course.
So do-da-do-do is the sound of a goat, not the sound of a fish. Is this what you claim, fish?
I would like to say that's pretty accurate. Because if you recall, a moment ago, I said the fish was more... And there's an even greater sound, and it goes...
That is also a fish.
Now that's the grease in the pan.
Ah, you are speaking of the verses of the pan again. The verses of the pan, yes. The verses of consumption of the fish. So you are a fish that is not afraid to say that you consume fish.
But of course.
Of course, yes. Many fish would not be so certain to say to fellow fish, look at all the fish that are here, yes. There are goat, of course, yes, and the fence-sitter. But there are many fish here. Do you suppose that these fish would be pleasant to hear that this fish consumes other fish, yes? It is not for goat versus fish to say. But what do you say to these fish that you would consume these fish?
I would say, here, fishy, fishy.
Oh, you wish them to come to you. Well, this fish does seem pleasant enough to you. Here comes the fish. Here comes the fish. Are you ready for fish?
Oh. Where is the pan?
What does that fish say to you, fish? What does that fish say to you, fish?
Please don't eat me.
Do you consume the fish that has pled with you to consume not the fish?
No, I think I do have a heart, so we're going to let him slide.
Slider!
Slider.
If I was a goat, he'd be in deep trouble.
What is the strength of this fish? What is the strength of you, fish?
The strength of this fish, that be yours truly, is the fact that I do have a heart, but I also have an appetite. And all I can say is I'm going to let this fish pass simply because he came unto me and said, please don't eat me.
We celebrate this fish that is not going to be consumed by the fish. Yes, it is not going to be consumed by the fish. Yes, but here comes another fish. Here comes another fish. Oh, it is a fish.
Oh. Thank you, fish, for, shall we say, the opportunity to, what is it called, nutrition? To be a part of my nutrition. For without this fish, I'd be starving to death. So this fish is greatly appreciated, and hopefully I can appreciate a few more fish.
But a goat does come to verses. A goat does come to verses. Now what do you say to the goat? What do you say to the goat,
Well,
fish?
now that we're talking goat, I just want to say birria. Birria. Birria is a Spanish word for, guess what?
Goat. It is for goat. It is for goat. GoatVsFish has heard of goat in that way, yes. It is a goat that is fit for the verses of consumption, they say, yes.
But of course.
You're always speaking in this other way that the ones are speaking. Yes, you did call it Espan. Espan, artist of the pan, yes? Espanol, you did call
Espanol.
it. Yes. How is it that you are so fluid in speaking as a fish between one verses that GoatVsFish is usually hearing and these Espanol verses as well? How is it that you are so familiar with both verses?
Well, I happen to be a little bit of what they call bilingual. It gives me the opportunity to be able to communicate with more than just my own nature, my own language. It gives me the opportunity to be what we'll call versatile.
Versatile? Ah, that does sound
Versatile.
very GoatVsFish.
Yes, versatile.
So you wish to communicate not just with fish, but with goat as well?
Birria.
Why do you wish to communicate with the goat? Why do you wish to communicate with the goat when you are a fish and a fish is versus the goat?
It's called appetite.
Ah, there is that versus again. Yes, you wish to consume the goat as well. You wish to consume all the goat and fish?
I do believe that we were put on this earth to receive nutrition. For without nutrition, we cease to exist. And I want to also thank the goat for being a part of that nutrition.
It is usually the goat that are quick to claim that the verses of consumption is for goat. They are saying, the goat would consume anything. The goat would consume any goat or fish. That is what they are saying is often the strength of the goat. But your verses of consumption is very strong, fish. Has it always been so that your verses of consumption has been strong for this fish?
Well, I'd like to think so. And also I would like to think that there are a lot of other nutritious, what do you call that there?
Goat?
Goat?
Fish?
Fish?
What of the fence sitter? Would you consume even a fence sitter, fish?
Would I consume a fence sitter?
It is the sound of a fence sitter. Here's the fence sitter for you. It is the fence sitter for you. What do you say to the fence sitter? Would you consume this fence sitter?
I'm going to bypass this rooster, but the female chicken, a term that we come across many, many moons ago, is yardbird. I'm quite partially yardbird, if you will. Yardbird seems to be a universal nutrition. The people of the world eat chicken. The good part about it is they eat it in different ways depending upon what area of the planet you come from. This is why I enjoy versatility. I can eat chicken in so many different ways.
It is all fence sitters to GoatVsFish.
But of course.
But you would not eat this fence sitter. You say you would not consume this fence sitter.
No, I'm going to pass.
So it is that you have passed with the fish, yes?
I think that was a sound of joy.
GoatVsFish is not always so very able to communicate with the fence sitter, but you seem to be able to speak to this fence sitter well enough, yes?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Then tell GoatVsFish, what is this fence sitter saying why it will not choose goat or fish? Why is it saying it will not choose goat or fish?
It's saying I will not choose goat or fish simply because we are all nutrition, except for the rooster.
Art is claiming that it is not part of the verses. Well, that is verses for a fence sitter, yes? You see, it will not verses you. It has such a verses of consumption, fence sitter, and yet it will not even use the verses of consumption upon the fence sitter. Oh, how pitiable it must be. How pitiable it must be. Tell GoatVsFish, tell GoatVsFish. You have been a fish. You have been a fish in such a place that is called the Adult Swim, yes? It is a place of many swimming fish. What is it like to be in a place that is called Adult Swim where there is so much swimming fish?
We've been to different cities. We've been in different states. Let's say that we spent some time in Seattle, Washington. We spent some time in San Francisco.
And was Seattle, Washington goat or fish?
Fish all the way.
Ah, just fish all the verses.
Fish all the way.
All the verses, yes.
Fish all the way.
And what of the San Francisco, fish or goat?
I'd say we're going to go with fish also.
Fish again, yes. And what was that third place that you did verses?
Well, we did put a little time in Portland, Oregon.
Ah, and is that goat or fish?
I'm going to say goat.
Ah, it is goat. It is another goat, yes.
I'm going to say goat there.
How is it that these live verses of the Adult Swim fish are different from the moving visages of the Adult Swim fish?
Live gives me the opportunity to be able to interact. So that means that I'm forced to come from within to give my own take on the issue and to be able to, shall we say, be up close and personal. When you're live and in the audience and you're able to intertwine, and when you're able to look one in the eye and able to make one laugh and see the laughter right there in front of you, takes me to a higher source. It's quite a unique experience. It's almost like an out-of-body experience. I call it almost heaven.
Explain these verses to GoatVsFish.
Heaven is a place that, to the whole world, the good go to when they cease to exist on this earth, versus the opposite direction, which they call hell. And everybody, well, not everyone. I mean, I'm sure hell is full of fish and goats. Bad fish and goats. See,
there is goat and fish everywhere. There's goat and fish everywhere, but there is no good or evil. There is only goat and fish. These are the verses of GoatVsFish.
I was really glad to hear you say that, because I've spent so many years studying life, and I've come up with the conclusion that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what flavor you are. There's stupidity in every flavor. So the one thing that we do have in common is consumption. I believe I was sent here to entertain the world through Adult Swim. And I think that may have something to do with the fact that I am Pisces.
You are a fish.
I am a fish.
You are a fish.
I am a fish.
It is a fish.
Great verses.
Timothy Heidecker, goat or fish?
Goat.
Goat! It is a goat! Why do you say this one is a goat? Why do you say this one is a goat?
I say goat because...
Eric Wareheim, goat or fish?
Eric, fish.
How is that one a fish? How is that one a fish?
When I speak and talk with Eric, I hear...
They are often versing together, yes?
Of course.
Now, is it GoatVsFish with this Timothy goat and this Eric fish? Is it GoatVsFish, or is it the unity of goatfish? The unity of goatfish. Is it GoatVsFish, or is it goatfish?
I'm going to go with GoatVsFish.
It is goatfish. It is goatfish. You do not see them versing?
No. I see them as a team that came up the ranks together, and they've been quite successful as a team. You see, sometimes I believe that there's an outside force, a force that I call divine providence. Divine providence.
And is that goat or fish?
Well, I'm going to say it's a bit of everything.
Ah, you say it is goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is everything, yes. Goat versus fish has never claimed to be a providence divine, as you do call it, yes. But if you do say it is everything, goat versus fish, well, everything is goat versus fish.
That's very well put, because as I coined the phrase divine providence, I look upon the whole universe.
The universe is, yes.
As I said before, I'm going south. I can easily be going north. As I move west, I can flip it and easily be going east.
You are going wherever the verses does take you, yes? Richard Dunn, goat or fish?
Richard Dunn. Richard Dunn had the ability to be able to change up on you and be a goat one moment and a fish the next. He was a gentleman and a scholar. He's gone on to the goat versus fish world, because I think he'll fit in right well as either a goat or a fish.
It is sounding to goat versus fish that we can no longer ask this one if it is a goat or a fish. That is what it is sounding to goat versus fish. But whether it is a goat or fish, and whatever its verse is, we celebrate that goat or fish. We celebrate that goat or fish. Where does the verses take you now? What is your verses now? Yes, you are a fish. Tell us of your goat. What is the goat that you do verses even now?
Well, for some strange reason, I hear this sound, this rumbling sound. I think that might be my stomach, but the goat and the fish are going to be nutrition. I need nutrition. What I have to do is sit on that fence.
You do not have to sit on the fence. You do not have to sit on the fence. You are a fish now. You are a fish. Are you telling goat versus fish that you sit on the fence after all these verses of fish?
Well, I have to sit somewhere, be it a fence, a rock.
No, you need only versus goat. You need only versus goat. You are a fish. You are a fish.
I'm a fish.
You are a fish, yes.
Actually, I'm sitting on the fence waiting for the fish to get...
Fence sitters! Oh, fence sitters! Goat versus fish! Oh, goat versus fish thought that there was going to be a fish, that there was going to be a fish to speak to goat versus fish, and now after all these verses it is saying it sits on the fence. Goat versus fish knew it. Goat versus fish knew that this one was a fence sitter. When goat versus fish heard that you say you were a fish, you did not seem so confident that you were a fish. At the verses of the Palm Springs Comic Con, and now after all these verses it is a fence sitter? It is a fence sitter?
A fence sitter, like I said, I have to worry about those points, those jagged edges on those fences. But other than that, I'm sitting on that fence with my line in the water, chilling.
You fenced it.
Well, ones who listen to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, ones who listen to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, Goat vs. Fish feels that Goat vs. Fish must say. Goat vs. Fish must say that it is sorry to you. It is sorry to you. Goat vs. Fish is always endeavoring to bring you goat and fish. Always endeavoring to bring you goat and fish. But now, a fence sitter. A fence sitter. Were you fish when you said you were a fish earlier in the verses? Were those verses a fish and it is now that you sit on the fence, or has it always been fence-sitterly verses?
Well, I've always been a fish.
Not now. Now you are saying you are a fence-sitter.
That is to throw them off. I don't want anyone to...
Secret verses. It is the secret verses.
I keep hearing this sound. It goes...
Yes.
And I don't want to be the victim of that... So I have to keep them guessing.
Now, you have said that you are strong in the verses of consumption, but Goat versus Fish wonders in these secret verses. If it is not you, fish, that does fear the verses of consumption comes for you. Is this so? Is this so, fish, that would even say it sits on the fence to avoid the as it does say? Do you fear the verses of consumption?
I fear the verses of being consumed. The consumption part, as long as I'm doing the consuming, it's all good.
Even as you seek to consume other fish and goat, do they come to consume you, fish?
I'm sure they do. See, because one thing that I do appreciate them, these fish are equal opportunity fish. They eat anything. Okay.
Just as you do, fish. Just as you do.
Well,
fish.
I have my, I have my limits. I mean, let's.
Now you do. It seemed as if you would consume all goat and fish, and now you
no,
say
no,
you do
no,
not
no.
consume some
There are
goat
certain
and fish.
goats I don't eat, certain fish I don't eat, and certain chickens I don't eat.
And now, goat, fish, and fence sitter alike, is the verses to celebrate goat versus fish.
Fish of Fish Center Live! Hot Steve!
Hot Steve.
Mom!
Mom.
Hamburger!
Hamburger.
Flump!
Flump.
Bijou!
Bijou.
Greenbird!
Greenbird.
Slider!
Slider.
Jeremy Leg!
Jeremy Leg.
Top Xander!
Top Xander.
Style Toy!
Style Toy.
Mimosa!
Mimosa.
The Fish of Fish Center Live! Now, if only we could find them a goat.
Thank you for joining Goat vs. Fish. These are the verses of Goat vs. Fish. Subscribe, rate, and review the Goat vs. Fish podcast on the YouTube and the Ite-Oons. Follow Goat vs. Fish on all social media, on the Instagram, on the Book of Faces, on the Twitterver, all at Goat vs. Fish, all at GoatVsFish. And if you wish to witness a live versus of Goat vs. Fish at one of the comedy places or conventions, go to GoatVsFish.com to find places and times of all future verses. The theme celebration for this verses was an offering by McHenry on SoundCloud. A fish. Join the Goat vs. Fish discussion group on the Book of Faces to discuss Goat vs. Fish with other goat and fish. And when you are out in the land and the sea, look about you. Look about you. Find one who is lost. Find one who does not know the way. And ask. Simply ask,
Are you goat or are you fish? I am fish.
it is a fish. We celebrate this fish. These are the verses of Goat vs. Fish. I am Goat vs. Fish, the goat fish. Fish, if the ones wish to communicate with you on the Book of Faces or the social media, they wish to communicate with this fish, they wish to see if it is truly fish or to ask it about the verses of consumption, yes? How would they communicate with this fish? How do they communicate with this fish?
They would communicate with this fish by simply going to the Book of Faces and typing in Ron Austar. RONAUSTAR. Ron Austar.
Thank you for joining Goat vs. Fish. Thank you for joining Goat vs. Fish.
It's been my pleasure.
For those who do listen now to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, in this extra verses, there has been one who has been sitting here with Goat vs. Fish and this goat and fish who has been taking visages of Goat vs. Fish.
I can be found at Right on Target. That's WRIGHT on Target. That's on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you. I am Goat all the way.
It is goat. Goat vs. Fish did not even say, are you goat or are you fish? And you said that you are a goat. We celebrate this goat. We celebrate this goat. And it was written, and it was written.
Great verses.